over setting up your vent settings on the Servo I ventilator. If you come across the ventilator and it's not already on standby, you would turn it on from the back. It's right here behind this button. And that's the main on button. There's also this button here, which is our go button. But we're going to set our vent settings before we do that. So the important things that to notice on the front screen are we an adult or infant? And we are going to choose adult. And are we going to choose invasive or non-invasive? So most of the time we're going to be invasive. We'll have non-invasive in a different video. Let me notice if you do press non-invasive, you know you're in non-invasive because it turns bright orange. But today we're talking about invasive, so that's what we're going to do. Now, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go into our mode. And I do this by pressing up here, and this is a touch screen. There are several different softwares you might see out in the field. So you might see different modes under here, but we're going to look and see what modes we have here on this model. So on this model, the most likely to be used modes that we're going to have are going to be volume control, pressure control, PRVC, and then we might use SIMV. And notice SIMV, it gives us pressure control, PRVC, or volume control. So we can do all of those separately. Pressure support CPAP, we'll talk a little bit later in this video. So, but today we're going to stick with volume control. And in volume control, these are our settings. So obviously we're going to choose a tidal volume according to our patient. So we'll choose 450 here. Respiratory rate, I notice I'm touching, then turning to adjust. And then I can touch it here again, or I could touch it there. PIPA 5 sounds reasonable. Let's put this one on 100%. Notice that it stopped right there at 60 and it gave me a little beep and it wouldn't let me go further. What that is, it's letting me know that that's a high FiO2 and we would like, and it's like saying, hey, are you really sure you want to go up? It doesn't mean I can't do it, because watch, if I keep turning it, it lets me go up. And it shows yellow there. It's letting me know, this is really high oxygen. Eye time, I'm going to turn that up a little bit to 1. Pause time. In volume control on the Servo, it has a preset pause. You always want to remember to turn that off. It's not something we routinely do with our patients, so I'm turning that pause time to 0. Next thing I'm looking at here is the rise time. The rise time is how fast that breath is going to be delivered, how fast that flow is going to be delivered to the patient. If your patient doesn't have a huge inspiratory demand, doesn't have something like asthma, something where they're super short of breath, you could probably just set that around 12 o'clock. So that's going to be 0.2 in seconds. And in other models of the Servo, this will be in percentage. And then if it seems like they need their flow a little faster, you can always just make that rise time shorter. Our trigger, we have the capability of doing both pressure, which it shows up as negatives here. And then we also have the capability of doing flow. For most patients, we're going to be in flow trigger unless it's auto cycling per se. So once I've chosen all of my settings, I can see things like the IE ratio and the minute volume set here, as well as the flow up here in this tiny box in the corner. Now I'm going to press accept, so then I'm going to push this button here on the side to actually start ventilating. Okay, so I'm going to give it a couple of breaths, give it a minute here for this to set up before I start setting my alarms, right? Because several of the alarms I'm going to need to set are going to be dependent on what's actually happening with the patient. So these numbers right in here, and you got to remember it's a touch screen because this can happen. You end up going through several screens. These numbers right in here are our red numbers, our actual numbers being delivered to the patient. So this is my peak pressure. Obviously in volume control, that would be my number one concern. How are these lungs? Is it taking a lot of pressure in order to ventilate them? My mean airway pressure, my PEEP, are all up here in yellows. Respiratory rate, actual respiratory rate, my plastic lung, shock and awe is not breathing spontaneously. If the patient were breathing spontaneously, that would go up. And then down here we have our actual IU ratio and our minute volume. So once the patient's been breathing for a little while, we put this on the patient, then we can go to our alarm settings. And I notice my peak pressure's 22. I'll go ahead and leave that high pressure at 40. My minute ventilation's 6.3, so I'll go ahead and take that down a little. High minute ventilation, I'll take that down a little. And these you're all going to set according to what you learn in class. High respiratory rate, that seems reasonable, and my PEEP. Okay, so then once I've chosen my vent settings, I'm going to press accept. Sound level, you always want your alarms to be at 100%. You want them to be heard from across the hospital. And I'm going to press accept. Okay, so that is basically setting up volume control. Now, from volume control, if I were going to do something like find a plateau pressure, I would press the inspiratory hold button. And then I'm going to have that plateau. Now, nothing happened on this screen because I wasn't on the correct screen for it. But here it is. And now it disappeared, so I'll go ahead and do that one more time. So here's my inspiratory hold, and there's that beautiful plateau, and there's my plateau pressure. And it'll actually do your calculations for you. So, if I go to this screen, I'll wait for it to come back up. It's going to give me my static compliance right in here, which it did. The other thing we can do here is our expiratory hold to check for auto PEEP. So that's going to be right here. Notice this is just a little guard to keep people from bumping into the buttons. Okay, so other than that, we have all of our other modes. So if we wanted to change a mode, so say we wanted to go to pressure control, we would set all of our numbers in here. So one thing you need to remember about the servo is this is not a total PIP, but a delta P. So 15 plus 5 equals 20. So our total PIP would be 20 with a delta P set at 15. So you want to remember that. You don't ever want to think that this is a total PIP on the servo. Different ventilators are different as far as whether they're total PIP or delta P. So if we choose all these settings, then we press accept, that's when it'll change. So that allows you to change and set up those settings on a different mode before you switch over. And then we could go back to volume control the same way. And my settings should still be there. And there they are. A couple other things that this does is we have some trends. So if we wanted to see what's happened since we've been had the patient on the ventilator, you could see where your peak pressures have been, how much they've been breathing spontaneously. Under menu, there are alarms. So you can do alarm history. That's our alarm profile, sorry. Menu, alarm, history. And this will tell you all the alarms that have gone off. So say you had this set up in the hospital setting, not the lab setting, and the nurse or someone said, oh, it was alarming a little while ago. You could see if it was because the patient was coughing or maybe they became disconnected. Okay. Also under menu, you can review trends, event logs. This would be like different vent changes that were made, different alarms, silences that were made, so you can review all that. Quick access gives us a couple of different things. This is how we would access our loops. So if we're trying to see what's happening with the patient and evaluating our flow volume loops or our volume pressure loops. Okay. We can also there's open lung tool, you'll learn about that in the future, and suction support. The nice thing about suction support is this is when if you're going to disconnect the patient from the ventilator in order to open suction, or maybe you have to move the circuit around, something like that, it's not going to alarm. It's going to pre-oxygenate with 100% oxygen, and then it'll let you move everything around, and then you can put this back on, reconnect it, and it gave me an alarm, but it went ahead and went right back into ventilating the patient. So there's just no extra steps, and it's not going to alarm, especially if you're doing something like moving the ventilator around, you're on the opposite side of the bed of the patient. One other mode I wanted to tell you about, it's kind of very cool, is pressure support CPAP on the Servo I. So the pressure support CPAP on the Servo I has an automatic backup ventilation. So kind of just like when we went over that that suction support where it's automatically going to just silence, and then when you reconnect it to the patient, it'll give them 100% O2 and just start back up. That's kind of what our auto mode pressure support does. So we're going to set our pressure support. We'll choose 10. And it's asking us to also set a backup ventilation. So we're going to use those settings that we chose earlier. 15 a delta P plus 5 is a total PIP of 20. And let's just give them a backup rate of 10, because this is just in case they stop breathing. Okay, we're going to press accept, and the patient's going to be on CPAP. CPAP pressure support, so all of this is now spontaneous. This is all the patient's work of breathing, right? Then should my patient stop breathing, we'll see what happens here. I'll go in apneic. And it's giving me the alarm, no patient effort. I'm going to go ahead and silence that alarm so we don't have to hear it. And it's in backup ventilation. Okay, so it's automatically giving these settings. It's not in pressure support anymore. But if the patient starts breathing again, it goes right back into pressure support CPAP. So it jumps back and forth by itself. So that's a nice feature of the Servo. So should the patient get sedation, it'll go into backup ventilation, and should they start spontaneously breathing again, it'll go right back in. PRVC is another great mode of the Servo, and what makes this mode great is it has the nice flow waveform of pressure control while it's giving you a volume guarantee. So I'm going to tell the ventilator what tidal volume I would like, and it's going to jump around, giving a little more, a little less, until it gets right into that tidal volume. So right now it's 477, it overshot a little bit. So it's going to take the pressure down a little until it gets a little closer. And what I was talking about with what makes this mode great, and this is also what makes pressure control a good mode, although we don't have the volume guarantee, so there's the opportunity for barotrauma or under ventilation. What makes this mode great is this flow waveform, and the reason that that's a great waveform is that flow starts out really fast when you're anatomically at the large airways, and as you go to the distal or the smaller airways, it slows down, which keeps the flow nice and laminar and enables you to get more bang for your buck and more volume with less pressure. Okay, so one of the nice things about this is the most commonly used settings are you're able to change them right here with the knob. And that with the knob changes, you do not need to do anything other than turn the knob. Yes. So this is the alarm silent button, obviously. And that it has the yellow and it's the alarm crossed out. So if I wanted to change my respiratory rate, we're going to wean this patient, I would just do it right there. I don't need to go into the settings. Because if I were to do it within the settings, I need to get to the right place, and then touch, and then press accept. So that's like 3 steps. The downfall of this is if I were in something like SIMV, where is my pressure support? That at 10. And I just wanted to change, per se, my pressure support. I have no choice but to go in here to change my pressure support because I don't have that on the front screen. So if I was going to wean the pressure support to 8, I would need to go in. However, if I'm just weaning the rate or the FiO2, I can do that from the main screen. Again, anytime you get to 60, either weaning down or going up, it will alarm. And then it just means you have to just put up with that alarm and twist it a little bit longer, and then it'll go. All right, so that's kind of the servo in a nutshell. There are other modes, and we'll go into the loops and scalars in another video, but that's how to set up your servo ventilator.